Recording. All right. Let me. Can I do that? Okay. That's a little better, I think. All right, you guys. How's everyone's weekend? Yeah. It's a very heavy Wednesday, it feels like. All right. Okay. So today we're going to start with the three-statement model, and then um, we'll build on this one next week, and potentially also on Saturday, I'm going to host office hours for the pitch for you guys to kind of come ad hoc and work on it whenever you guys want. Okay. All right. So the first thing I kind of want you guys to go through is the PIB. So basically, hold on. Let me make sure that it's also on it. Let me check. Okay. I don't know. All right. Cool. I'm just going to go ahead and start with the time we have allotted. Okay. So the first thing you guys have in this file is the financial statement model, modeling best practices sheet, and then we have the PIB, which is a public information book. So typically when you're working as an analyst, either like at a bank or equity research, et cetera, a lot of your job as you're entering is to do a lot of the grunt work. And so one of those things is putting together a PIB, which has a lot of related documents for management to then review or senior people within your team to then review to better understand the company. If you go to cohort announcements and download everything there. All right, cool. All right, so to give you guys an understanding, the first things we're going to be using are the 10K. So make sure to download that and have that open and not just kind of like have it on the Google Drive form because that'll make your life a little harder. And the equity research PDF as well is what we'll be using today. All right. And then outside of that, go ahead and open the Winna Financial Statement Model Day 1 Excel file, which is this one right here. Oh shit, I opened it on Sheets. But go ahead and download that, open that in Excel. And then while you guys are doing that, I'm gonna show you guys this modeling best practices Excel, just to kind of run through some general things that are helpful for modeling literally anything, risk analysis, etc. So you can save this as like a default template. I added the colors that you use in order to color code things in your sheet to this. So like if I were to try to edit up here and add a color, all my theme colors are the relevant colors. So if you set this as your default Excel sheet, you can open it up with like the right inputs without having to edit those yourself manually. We're not going to go over that today though. So some high level things are understanding different color coding things in modeling. So one is when you're hard coding something in, it's going to be blue. Whenever it's a formula, it'll be black. Whenever it's a link to another worksheet, it'll be green. Whenever you're linking to another file, it'll be red. And then whenever you're linking to a data provider, so something that like live updates based off of external data, so like some sort of provider will like provide that package where you can use that plugin, it'll be dark red. And then this is typically the formula you would use to like essentially format multiples. So if I were to click Control 1, you don't have to learn this right now. It's just to kind of go over it high level, and input this in. It would make it such that it's formatted all pretty and it all lines up like this. So you can see like my negatives have the parentheses and the X's are like formatted like right above each other, and it's nice and cute. This has text in it, but if I were to type with text into Excel, I can't actually compute anything with that. It doesn't read it as a number. It reads it as text as soon as you put any level of text in it, right? So this is actually custom formatted. If you can see up here where it says 30, it doesn't say days, right? Up here at the very top, like above B. And so whenever it's reading that, it's reading it as 30 and it's not reading it as 30 days. And that's because in my custom formatted, I did 0 and then parentheses, days, and parentheses, right? So that's how you can have kind of like nice formatting without it altering your model's ability to be read. Over here, I put together a few modeling best practices for you guys. Literally, if you have an internship, etc., these will all be pretty relevant. It also has like a few key shortcuts as well. I'm not going to go over all of these right now, but just to kind of let you guys know that exist and that's there. All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start on the financial statement model. So if you can open that up, on your computer, we're going to go ahead, have that there. And then I'm going to see if I can do a partial screen share. Let me see. In order to share the other half of my screen as something else. With like my notes. Let's see. Okay, do you guys have that all up? Nice. Okay. Let's see. Financial statement model. Share. What does that look like? Is it a little better? I think that should be. Is that all right? Like that? Is that legible to you guys? All right. So I think the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to have some of you guys, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to do some of the research on your own. And then we're going to kind of come back together and use the pre-input parts of it. So your PIB, which is your public information book, has information on Apple from 2018. So this is as if we were pitching Apple in 2018, right? So that's kind of what we're using. And the reason why is because it's a lot of like, it's very easy to read, easy to follow, while still having a few kind of like adaptation points. So, I want you to kind of like split screen your Excel sheet and your company 10K. And then which of you guys have worked with a 10K before, like have looked at a 10K before? Okay, cool. Most of you guys. Cool. All right. So if you go ahead and split screen that, the data aggregation process is going to be using historic data from the last 3 years, which are all going to be on the 10K. Most 10Ks have the previous 3 years. Some of them might have 5. Some of them might have 2. So we're kind of like utilizing 3 years of data here. So go ahead and open that. What is this? Okay. All right. So sure. And the idea is to start researching each one of these line items in the 10K. So if I were to open this, I can easily navigate to the income statement by just doing Control F, income statement. It'll be like consolidated statement of income, or kind of shifting around. Income. Yeah. You might have to kind of like scroll down towards the bottom. All the financial statements are typically together, but go ahead and start navigating to that section. And do you guys have Adobe Acrobat? Do any of you guys have Adobe Acrobat? No? Okay, cool. Then we'll have to do this a bit of like a manual way, but that's all right. Okay. So this consolidated balance sheets, shareholders' equity, cash flows. I think I skipped it. Okay. All right. So this one, it says consolidated statements of operations, but it'll have a lot of the information that we're looking for here. Yeah. So yeah, comprehensive income is separate. So yeah, they do it a little bit funnier here from what I remember. So the idea here is to essentially pull the data from each one of these years that is relevant to the line item that is next to it. So for cost of sales, as you can see here, we have 163,756 million. Remember that this is in millions. So something to note, like know for yourself. So in thousands except per share, which is consistent with what's up here, right? So making sure that we know what units we're using so we can reflect that well whenever like we're quantifying it in our pitch. But the main thing is going to be kind of copying over this information. So cost of sales, making sure you enter that as a negative, and making sure you're using the right years. So as you can see here, whenever you're modeling something, in terms of time, you're going to go from left to right. But whenever they report it on financial statements, they do it the opposite way, at least in this one, right? So you want to make sure that you're copying over the right multiples and the right variables. So over here, I'm going to start with 2016, and that's going to be my cost of sales, and go ahead and input that. Since you don't want to change the formatting whenever you're copying over stuff, so I pasted it, I can click Control and then move over to the just values version. And if you're not sure which one's which, if I hover over it with my mouse, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. All right. If I hover over it with my mouse, it shows me what that is. So this one says keep source formatting, which means it's going to copy the original formatting from the document I'm copying it from, which we don't want. We want to keep our formatting. So you want to do mesh destination formatting. We're going to click that one. Or we can do it with our like arrow keys as well by clicking Control and then moving over to one we want. So I'm gonna give you guys like a little bit to go through and try to find some of these things in the financial statement, since most of you guys said you raised your hand whenever you said you had seen a 10K before. But literally, like, what you can do is like interest expense. Yeah. And now I just found like my interest expense by clicking Control F, and I'm looking for it that way. So that's kind of the idea there. I'm just gonna give you guys like a tiny little bit of time to do some of that. I don't expect you to get it all done. But yeah. And then we'll go from there. Also, let me know if there's any questions or you want me to re-explain something. But let's see. Oh shit. Nice.
This is your brain when you're struggling to focus. And this is your brain when you're in the zone.
Alright. Very coffee tea vibes. You only get 2 seconds of it, so use them wisely. Alright, how's the word search going? You guys having fun? Okay, cool. Alright, so the main thing with these is that some of them aren't going to be super straight up, but you're not going to know exactly A, where to find them, or B, they might be named something slightly differently. So like for example, for like consolidated statements of operations, it's like what the hell, like just put income statement, like it's really not that deep. You know what I'm saying? So for a lot of those things, you might have to kind of look around, think about where it might be. Typically, like for example, I know like if I'm able to look up something that's within the income statement, so if I were to look up cost of sales, then I find like the consolidated statements of operations, right? And I can compare and see like, okay, like this is kind of what we're looking for there. But with that being said, you guys already have the raw data finalized over here, which I input for you guys. So you guys can go back on your own and kind of input it yourselves, or maybe choose to like copy that over into like a template for you guys to use for your own stock. But the idea for today is kind of getting used to finding that on your own and kind of transferring that information over. You can also use Refinitiv to pull a lot of that information, and that can make your life a little faster, a little easier. But I think it's also good, especially for like your first go around, to kind of do it on your own through the 10K. But I also know that like time isn't always on our side, so it is what it is. But especially for a lot of these things, you're gonna have to calculate on your own. So let's say that we had all of these already input. So like once you have your income statement, you can start building out your assumptions. And your assumptions are what's going to actually drive your model a lot of the time. Because when it comes to projecting out your cash flows, you're essentially utilizing trends, historical trends from the company in order to decide how to weigh things and how heavily to weigh certain growth in certain sections, right? So if I'm going to say like, okay, revenue is going to increase by this amount, but how much our cost of goods sold is going to increase? Is it going to be directly proportional? Historically, has it been heavier? Do we have any like reasons to believe that it's going to increase in a higher degree than it previously has over the previous years? Those kinds of things. So, the idea here is to essentially kind of take note of previous revenue growth to get an idea of, for example, the revenue growth rate. So I put the actual formulas that you would use to calculate each of these things here. So you don't have to do any guesswork. You can understand kind of like what I'm doing there. But the idea is kind of taking all of these percentages of things that you already took. So gross margin, you're trying to understand how much of your gross profit you actually get from your initial revenue. So like subtracting those like costs there, right? And then when it comes to R&D as a percentage of sales, this isn't necessarily going to be something that you use as like a driving metric, but it does give you an understanding of, okay, like how much is R&D actually contributing to sales, right? Those kinds of things. So these are really good metrics to have. And once you have this like kind of short amount of historical data, you could probably just like put a nice playlist on, sit there for an hour and knock pretty much all of that out really easily. I would say modeling in and of itself isn't that hard, especially when it comes to building out a lot of these like pre-built models. I think the hard part of modeling comes whenever you have to create a lot of your own expectations and a lot of your own like scenario analysis and those kinds of things to then create your assumptions. But like a base model, like a base DCF is honestly like really, really straightforward. And you're gonna kind of see what I mean because I think you could probably knock out a DCF in like my opinion, like 30 minutes even. Like, of course it might not be like the most nuanced thing in the world, but if I'm being real with you guys, I know a lot of you are like pretty stressed out about the idea of this pitch and like building out a model and like how to do all those kinds of things. A lot of people are building out really, really, really simple DCFs where they're just taking averages as growth rates and they're just applying those because why not? So, like, I want you guys to get a conceptual understanding of like why you do certain things as opposed to just telling you to do them. But there are certain things even in the industry that they're done in a certain way where it's just like, oh, we just like take an external analyst like view of what the growth rate should be for this line item from their model, and we just use that. And that's literally industry standard. So like a lot of these things are actually a lot simpler than they look, and people just kind of like to hype themselves a little bit by like acting like it's like a little bit harder than it is. And that's to hopefully give you guys a little bit more encouragement when it comes to engaging with it. So as you can see, this stuff's pretty straightforward. It's literally like elementary school, like division, multiplication. I'm not going to go over each one of these metrics and we're not going to use them just yet. But I do encourage you to kind of revisit this deck. I don't think it's helpful for me to like go through each individual thing because I feel like you guys are gonna get overwhelmed by like me just being like, and this number is this times this number. You know what I mean? And I want to instead focus on like the key points and then let you guys kind of revisit some of it on your own. And that's why it's like a pretty heavily annotated sheet, right? And just to give you guys an idea, like this three statement model, you could literally like change some of the inputs, like the raw inputs, and then just input the ones from your stock, like the historical like aspects of your stock, and it will automatically like like essentially calculate a lot of your model, like pretty much your entire model, right? So I would say like it feels like a lot of work when you haven't yet started it because it's like how am I going to get over this big hurdle? I don't know like what's on the other side of like the knowledge bubble that I don't know. You know what I mean? But it's really really simple and like most people just kind of like use someone else's model anyway. Okay, so same idea with the balance sheet, looking up those things within the financial statements or Refinitiv. And then same thing with this additional data. I tell you exactly where you can find this stuff in the 10K, right? But these things aren't necessarily gap things. It's a little blurry, huh? They're things that would kind of give us insights for in the future. For example, commercial paper, we might build a commercial paper revolver in order to make our three statement model balance. And you're probably like, what the hell is a commercial paper revolver? Like, I've never even heard that term before. But basically, let's say that like Apple had unexpected, lower than expected sales, right? What they would do is that they would kind of take out quick short-term financing through commercial paper, right? And that would then supplement to make sure that they were able to kind of like maintain the same like financials in terms of like filling in that gap from sales, right? So that's like kind of like short, quick term like lending. So that's something that you can maybe model in. You're not expected to do this for the pitch, by the way. This is more for your knowledge than it is for the pitch. Um, but in like a more like real model, you would kind of like build that in so you can maybe tweak that and play with that and say, okay, best case, worst case scenario. Because typically, whenever you're creating a model, you're not just creating it to say, like, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're creating it to say, like, here is the worst case. Here is my conservative case. Here is my best case, right? And that's why you have the assumptions, so you can easily change those assumptions, and then it automatically shifts the entire model, right? So, with that being said, just kind of go over what these are, just to kind of tell you guys. So, capital expenditures, that's going to be kind of like big expenditures, investments into things like PP&E, which is plant, property, equipment. So, if a manufacturing company buys a new plant, that would be a capital expenditure, right? So that would fall into that bucket. D&A related only to PP&E. So some financial statements will have that, some won't. A lot of these things, that's why I kind of say look at the 10K as well. You'll actually find in the text. Like it's not just going to be like as a line item on a financial statement. It's going to be in the text. So I'm trying to think of like what was a yeah. So here it says the weighted like looking for the weighted average interest rate. We can see here like a bunch of line items, but I can't see the weighted average interest rate. And I'm not going to necessarily be able to compute it given this information over here on the right. But if I were to kind of like control F it and like do some like kind of knowledgeable reading around, doesn't mean you have to like read the whole thing to find this one little like needle in the haystack. I could then see, okay, it's right here. The weighted average interest rate earned by the company on its cash equivalents, and marketable securities was as follows: 2.16, 1.99, 1.73 in these years respectively. Right. So you can see like a lot of like the good information is also in the text of the statement. That's like a big thing that like I kind of wanted to hone on with the section. So we're not going to go over each and every individual thing. Weighted average interest rate on commercial paper. Basically all that means is like how much are they on average paying like as an interest rate for this financing, this quick financing. And then weighted average interest rate on cash. How much are they essentially paying on cash in terms of like financing themselves that way. And so cash can also be things like marketable securities. So things that you can sell that are highly liquid are sometimes considered also like cash and marketable securities, like those kinds of things, right? All right. So the main bulk of our time is going to be spent over here in this really ugly looking model where you're like, oh, that's really, really gross. But lucky for you, all you literally have to worry about is these little sections right here. The pretty little blue, baby blue part right there, right? So the crux of this, so over here, you can see these like dark blue and black numbers. Those are the exact same numbers that you would have sourced in your data research section where it was like empty and I had you guys kind of take off like 5 minutes to go look for those numbers. Those are automatically those were already input there. Blue shows that it's hard coded, so it's not referencing anything. That's what that means. And then you also have kind of like your big line items denoted there. All right. So first thing we want to do is project out into the future. So today it is 2019. Project out into the future each line item individually. And so something to note is that each line item corresponds to something else. And I took some high-level notes on this for you guys as well. Just so you guys would have something to like reference that isn't just like a video of me talking, for the ones of you that are here. So, basically what we're gonna do is use certain growth rates in order to build out each of these things, right? And so in order to get those growth rates, you could do a few things. So one, and probably the best thing you could do is an equity research report, reference an equity research report that has a like similar model put in or some sort of forecast per line item, right? And when I say per line item, I just mean for these items. I don't mean like every single item on there, right? And so that's probably the best thing you can do. If you reach out to me once like we have your company hard set, I can try to pull a few strings to like get like on a terminal and get you an equity research report. Obviously like you can't do that the night before because I literally am having someone in Texas go to a Bloomberg terminal and print it out and send it to me. Don't say I don't love you guys because I obviously do. And so what we're gonna do here is basically that. Another thing you could do is use like an average. So a lot of people, not a lot of people, like a lot of like introductory people who are kind of like just building out their first model will just kind of like take an average of the growth rate historically and then kind of just like pull that out for like all the future years and then just kind of have it be like a flat growth, right? That's not always realistic. I mean, most times it isn't realistic. You're not going to have like the same percentage of growth every single year for a company, right? Like there's a lot of stuff happening. So with that being said, we're going to go over to the equity research report, which is in your PIB, and that's a 10K. Yeah. All right. Going over to the equity research report, and we're going to type in JP Morgan because I already know that it's there. So happy day for you guys. And you're going to go to this table that has these highlights right here. Kind of looks like that. And for it's page 31 on the PDF. All right. Cool. So on this on this equity report, there are a few highlighted numbers, and those are going to be the ones they're going to pull. But I want to kind of draw over here. And as you can see, it's projecting out things like cost of sales, revenue change year over year, SG&A as a percentage of sales, right? So they're really, really easy to read and kind of tell what you're looking for. And they're formatted similar to a financial statement because it's basically a screenshot from one of their models. Does that make sense? Cool. So if I was referencing an equity research report, you can also like use certain things online. essentially, I can just go ahead and copy these down as like my growth assumptions. And so what that would look like is, for the purpose of us and time, going over here and copying this section right here, and then going back over here and then pasting it in our empty one. Okay. That's just like, realistically, you would take the time to like look at each one, copy it over, but go ahead and do that real quick and just copy this little section where I said good practice to group all modeling assumptions together, and then paste that over to the empty sheet that we're working on right now. And let me know when y'all have done that. Well, will it just be like who's talking information, or is there like a like there's like a Q&A moment, but it's not like an elaborate Q&A moment. I already think for Addies, they didn't even ask her any questions. Like they literally throw like huge softballs at the girls, which is like a pro and a con. It's a pro because like you get softballs, but I guess it's a con because like you get softballs. So take that how you want. But I mean, I'll also be there, and like for all of you guys, like we're gonna set up like a softball question, and so you guys will kind of know what it is going in. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. But yeah, you guys should be good. Don't worry about that part. For our purposes, no. Like if you were able to get access to a equity report, this is basically showing their projections for 2019, 2020, and 2021, which are the 3 following years, of course, right? And so we can use those growth projections. We're still projecting out 5 years. So I'll basically, like, I was going to touch on a second, but I basically just drag these out straight line, post that for the next 2 years. And that's why they're black instead of blue. So blue again is hard coded. And then these are actual formulas. So if you were to audit where we have the black cells, so like this one right here, this one right here, any of these right here, you actually see it's like equals and then referencing one of my hard coded cells. And that's actually really important. Like you want to make sure that like if you are doing that, you're not just like, even if you're like pulling this fixed number out, and I'm gonna do it so it's bigger so you guys can see it. Even if I'm pulling, I'll do it over here. Even if I'm pulling like these numbers out, so you can see 6.2, 6.9, 6.9, 38.2, 32, I didn't just like copy and paste this one over here because I'm not hard coding it in. I'm referencing it as a formula. I'm actually just putting equals and then pointing it to that cell. So like equals and then referencing this cell, right? And that goes back to the initial thing we talked about where I said all hard-coded cells, meaning like all things that aren't formulas or aren't being computed, are blue, so that we know to change those if we want to change our assumptions, right? Whereas if I didn't do that, I would be probably confused and I wouldn't be able to fix my model, and it would be really hard to figure out like why it wasn't doing what I wanted to. All right. Yeah.
Really quick, how come Apple in 2019 was gonna down?
I don't know.
It is like, because it's like why would they expect it to go down and then
I think there was some sort of thing I remember that like I don't know exactly, but basically it caused them, it was like some sort of financial thing in terms of like legislature and like policy that actually caused them to have to pull their funds from Ireland. They had like a bunch of funds safeguarded in Ireland so that they didn't have to pay like excess taxes on them. And it actually caused them to kind of like pull out that money to kind of like remedy a little bit of the losses they incurred. I don't. So yeah, I think something was happening economically that time. I just don't know off the top of my head. Yeah. But yeah, okay, cool. Now we have those references, and that's going to build out pretty much our entire model. So when we go about changing these, basically our lives are going to change. right? So little thing to note. And that's what we're going to practice like sensitivity analysis with. But okay, so first looking at revenue. So we're going to draw this out by essentially taking previous year's revenue and then multiplying that by open parentheses. Here, I'll go a little more zoomed in. Is that legible? I think so. Equals previous year's revenue, right? Times, parentheses, 1 plus my revenue growth rate for that year. So it'll look like that. Does that make sense? All right. And the beautiful part of this is that we can do what we learned last time to drag this over to the right, which is what two buttons to drag over to the right?
The arrow key.
Not exactly.
Control. No.
Kind of. Like I think you guys are saying the control shift to select, so that's correct. Control shift arrow key, yeah. But then when I want to drag over the formula, I click control R. And that'll drag over the whole thing for me. So literally we spent like probably like less than not even a minute doing that. So you can see like how fast this can take you since you already have something that's kind of pre-built to help you out. All right, cool. All right, cost of sales, similar thing. So we're going to do, well, not similar thing. We're going to do revenue and then we're going to subtract gross profit, which we haven't input yet, but you can go ahead and reference it anyway. All right. It'll look like that. So far, it'll be the same as your above line item. And then you can go ahead, click this, hold shift, and then click to the right. Control R. All right. I'm going to hold here for a second. Any questions so far? Yeah.
This is like a personal thing. My computer's been a little messed up when I like lost the revenue growth for 2016. It just went away on the computer.
Oh, no, there is no revenue growth for 2016. You're totally good in terms of historical.
And what was the input for the? It was like F17 times which cell?
Which one are you looking at?
The 2019 revenue.
Oh, you're looking at so you're looking at previous year revenue times 1 plus the revenue growth rate of that year. And that's always going to be the formula to project revenue. The only difference might be what your growth rate is. But this will always be true when you're creating a three-statement model. All right, cool. And the three-statement model is like the base of pretty much every other model. So that's why I think it's important to like start from here. All right, cool. So we want to do gross profit. So we're going to take revenue, multiply that by this number down here, which is our gross profit margin forecast. Because over here, all of these things over here are our assumptions, right? So we're projecting these out. So we assume these things to enter in. All right. Very nice, very nice. Okay. All right. Go ahead and pull that over. And that should kind of shift your cost of sales. And then before we move on, I want to take cost of sales. I want to take the margin on cost of sales. This typically isn't a line item, but it's going to help us out in the future. in order to track our calculations and make our model a little cleaner, right? So the way that we take the growth rate is we take our current year cost of goods sold, or cost of sales, right? Divide that by our previous year, and then subtract that by 1. I know it's like a crazy number, but trust. Yeah, I'll go ahead and audit that. Okay. Solid. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So now I want to take, well, let's talk about it. Yeah. Now we're gonna say that R&D is gonna grow in line with revenue. So we're gonna do equals revenue times R&D percentage of sales, which is in our forecast. All right. It's a similar kind of thing. And then do the same thing with SG&A. So it's going to be equals revenue times SG&A percentage of sales. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and do that. All right. Once I see eyes, I know you guys are good. All right. Everyone good? Okay, cool. Now we're going to do gross profit minus R&D and minus SG&A. So basically just going straight down. So to get operating profit, we're going to start with gross profit and then subtract these two expenses. So research and development and selling generative administrative expense, like this. All right. And then go ahead and drag that over. And then for these things, the interest expense and other expense, we're going to make a cash and expense schedule. We're not going to do that today. I might not even do it next week. I might just do it for you guys. But for now, we're just not going to input that in for today. All right. So interest expense, it's a little bit harder to project. So we're just going to straight line that. And so for that, what we want to do is equals, and then this cell, since we're going to preserve that based off of that assumption, and then just drag that over. Or, yeah. You could lock it if you want to, but it's the same. All right. Any questions so far? Cool. So straight line basically just means it kind of like stays the same across. All right. Okay. So for pre-tax profit, we can basically calculate that from this. It's not going to take any assumptions. So we take EBIT, which we have up here, and then we add interest income minus other expense. All right. So it'll look a little bit like that. So starting with EBIT, we just kind of subtract all of our other expenses and interest expenses. All right. Solid so far? Cool. Okay. Gonna basically drag that across. Aren't we so lucky to have Control R do that for us? Okay. And that'll take us to taxes. So taxes we can't actually project. So we're going to use an assumption for that. So taking pre-tax profit, we're going to multiply that by our tax rate forecast, which is down here in our assumptions. Very nice. Okay. Is it better for me to let you guys just kind of like, we'll keep doing it for now. And then in a little bit, maybe I'll let you guys do it separately. Is it taking more time for me to do it with you guys, or which do you think is better? Like having the formulas and then you guys just kind of like working through the income statement, or me to kind of like walk you through each one just in case? Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. All right. So this one, same thing. We're going to pull it all the way across, which again, basically all we did was take pre-tax profit and then multiply that by the tax rate. All right, cool. And then that will take us to net income, which we're going to reference in a little bit in our cash flows, by essentially taking pre-tax profit and then subtracting our taxes and then dragging that across. All right, so this essentially over here is our actual income statement, right? Like what I have selected up here in terms of GAAP and in terms of typical line items. So what we have down here is going to be more of like financial metrics, non-GAAP related terms. So things like EBITDA. So DNA, we're going to make a DNA schedule, or I might just kind of create some sort of model that you guys can reference. We'll see. If not, you can maybe just have some sort of forecasted DNA if your equity report has that as well. But we're going to calculate EBITDA. So basically just take EBIT, which we calculated up here, and then you add DNA, which again, there isn't any projected DNA, so it should be about the same. And then drag that over. All right. And that'll take us to stock-based compensation. So stock-based compensation is actually an expense as well, and it typically grows in line with revenue growth. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the previous year's stock-based compensation. We're going to multiply that by 1 plus the revenue growth rate. Because we're assuming that as revenue grows or falls, so will stock-based compensation, since that tends to be the case in general. Does that make sense? And stock-based compensation is, for example, like if your employer gives you like X shares of Tesla stock for working at Tesla, right? Okay. And drag that to the right. And then we have adjusted EBITDA, because stock-based compensation does actually impact earnings. We're going to add it back, because typically what happens with stock-based compensation is that even though it's not a specific line item in terms of an expense, it gets grouped into research and development and SG&A, but it also issues more shares. So there ends up being more common stock through that, right? And so because of that, we're going to do equals EBITDA, and then make sure we add it back to accurately reflect our earnings to investors. Right? Okay, cool. All right, so you just forecasted the entire income statement, and it like didn't even take you like what, like 20 minutes? Not even. It's literally like 8:11. So definitely doable. Um, not that scary. All right, cool. So moving on to the balance sheet. So when it comes to the balance sheet, I have this written down in these notes as well. It's typically broken into a few, I don't know why I'm doing that, into a few key sections. So you have current assets, current liabilities, long-term assets, long-term liabilities, right? Everyone familiar with that concept? So as you can see over here, this section of our balance sheet are current assets, right? And just think about that like in the kind of like a logical way. My inventory, it's gonna come and go today, tomorrow, like this year to the next. My current assets are obviously my current assets because they're labeled as such. And then cash and cash equivalents, those are things that are highly liquid. They are like I can like easily kind of like pay, like my liquidity with those is high. So anything that has like a balance of less than a year is considered current. Anything longer than a year is considered non-current, right? Or some might call it long term. So PP&E, I'm not gonna get rid of like my plants or like my infrastructure within a year, right? So that's something that's considered a long-term asset. And then other non-current assets are obviously like more are non-current assets. So that's how that part is split up. And then accounts payable and other current liabilities, deferred revenue, and commercial paper. This section right here, that is considered my current liabilities because all of those are things that like will happen within the year. So accounts payable essentially means that that is resources that I spent that I still have to pay for. So for example, let's say like you came to clean my house and I said like, okay, like I'll pay you in a month. My accounts payable would have whatever amount of money I owe you to pay you next month because I already spent the services, but I haven't spent the money. Think about it that way a little bit. And then other current liabilities, that kind of says for itself. It's kind of like a general bucket. And then deferred revenue, that also is over here. So basically it's not earned revenue that has already been received. So let's say that like I cleaned your room and you said that you would pay me later. That to me, I can't recognize that as revenue because it hasn't like hit my pocket. I can't recognize that as cash. I can't recognize it as anything else. So currently it's deferred revenue. So that's kind of what that represents. And then commercial paper is again that short-term financing to kind of like bridge me over a storm or like that kind of thing. All right. So when it comes to modeling things out from the balance sheet, the main takeaway that I want you guys to have is that typically everything comes from a operating line item. Everything is correlated or driven by an operating line item, right? So like what does that mean? Well, for example, let's say I have a increase in inventories. I'm projected to have an increase in inventories. What does that mean I have to do? Like if I want more inventory, what do I like logically have to do? Like not like a line item, but just like what would I have to do to get more inventory? Like would I have to like how would I go about like getting the inventory itself? Like literally anyone.
Increase in production.
Yeah. And that involves what? Like paying more workers, that involves buying more inventory, right? Definitely. So that's going to increase my cost of goods sold, right? So the main thing when it comes to understanding modeling out things from the balance sheet is everything is driven by something in the operating, which is of course the income statement, right? And that's not always going to be the same for every company. It's not always going to say, okay, let's see, accounts receivable is going to grow in line with revenue. You can't say that for every single company. Do you know what I'm saying? Like maybe accounts receivable is going to grow because we're planning on taking on a lot more on credit. And that's just like part of our strategy. So it's like important to understand kind of like where the majority of these things come from when looking at the actual financial statements and those kinds of things, right? For you guys' sake, like you don't necessarily like have to be like super big on that. And I kind of simplified it in this kind of doc over here as well. So starting first with cash to cash equivalents, we're actually gonna leave this blank from pretty much all of today because we haven't done like a line in the cash flow statement yet. But accounts receivable, so basically the driver for accounts receivable, typically it's going to be revenue. As we get more money, we're going to have more money that's coming to us on credit. Those things just tend to like correlate to each other, right? So what we're gonna do is basically assume that AR is tied to that, and that's going to reference our revenue growth rate in order to actually increase AR, similar to kind of how we've been doing in the other ones as well, right? So basically taking the previous year, and then plus times, times 1 plus revenue growth rate. I think that's my revenue growth rate. Yeah. All right. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and do the same thing and drag that over. Okay. All right. So inventories, I mentioned this earlier, if inventories were to increase, we're going to be spending more on cost of goods sold to produce that inventory, because cost of goods sold is how much it costs me to create my inventory, right? So that's going to increase or decrease in line with COGS. So what I'm going to do here is also kind of build it off of there. And I'm going to reference this number that we built earlier, which I told you I was like, okay, to simplify our lives later on, we're going to add this growth rate, even though it's not typically a line item on the income statement, right? You guys remember that? All right, cool. So same kind of thing, taking the previous year times 1 plus the growth rate, which we have up here, not in our assumptions. See that? Make sure to put your end parentheses. That's what it's yelling at me for. All right. And then, yeah. 315. Oh, yeah. I forgot. For this one, I did parentheses minus 1. Hold on. Oh my god. Okay. All right. Okay. And so then we can go ahead and drag that across as well. And then the next one, other current assets, we're on also grow in line with revenue growth. So it's going to be the same kind of thing we did up here, referencing the revenue growth rate. So taking the previous year equals previous year times 1 plus the revenue growth rate in parentheses, and doing that way. And then pulling that across. And then same with other non-current assets. So typically when it comes to other items, if you can tie them to a certain operation, you're going to want to use that growth rate. But if you can't, then your default is always just like assume it grows in line with revenue and using the revenue growth rates. So same thing here. PP&E, I think we're going to save for another time, and then other non-current assets we're going to grow in line with revenue. So referencing previous times open parentheses 1 plus the growth rate, and then dragging that across. Does that make sense? Cool. And then we're just going to sum our total assets. So that's everything there. Mm-mm-mm. This guy hates me. Okay, it's fine. All right. So that brings us down to accounts payable. We're trying to grow in line with cost of sales growth. Because accounts payable, you're typically using that to pay suppliers. So if you are taking out debt, so payable means I owe money, right? And that's money that I owe that I haven't paid for a service that I've used. And so whenever you're taking out debt or you're using some sort of legal contract to borrow money, that's typically going to be notes payable. And so accounts payable typically has to do a lot with paying, like owing money to suppliers. And so because of that, we're going to actually grow it in line with cost of sales growth because it's more directly correlated to that than it is to revenue. All right. So similar kind of thing, using previous times 1 plus, and then the cost of sales growth rate. The reason why it keeps yelling at me, by the way, is because I don't put my end parentheses. But I'm just not doing that. All right. What did I do? 4%. Yeah. This one's like supposed to be multiplying against the negative, but she's not liking me right now, so we're just gonna raw input her here. All right. And that should fix that. Okay, so basically for this one specifically, I'm going to copy it from the finalized one because it's not letting me input. It keeps like yelling at me and I don't feel like redoing it. So I'm just gonna essentially copy that part over, enter it there, and that should give us negative 3.15 as opposed to that long like 1,000 something number. So that's just for that one, which I'll highlight it yellow, just so y'all know. And that'll give you a more reasonable accounts payable. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm pulling that over to the right. And then, actually, I'm going to stop there for a second. Any questions or anyone like struggling with anything? Or like confused like with copying this one over? I'm assuming y'all are good. Y'all are like super zoned, but like not asking questions. So I'm just like, maybe y'all are catching up. Maybe y'all want me to wait or. Okay. All right. All right. Okay, cool. So same thing down here in terms of building out other current liabilities. So as I said, whenever it comes to other items, if you can tie them to operations, then grow with revenue. If it's unclear, then just straight line it. So other current liabilities, we're going to say that those tend to grow in line with revenue. So previous, we're going to do times 1 plus revenue growth rate. I hate putting things. And then pull that across. All right. And then when it comes to commercial paper, we're going to do the exact same thing. Previous year times 1 plus revenue growth rate. And parentheses, enter. And then we'll pull that across. All right. Is that good? Okay. So when it comes to long-term debt, we're just going to straight line this. So we're going to reference the cell before it equals cell before it, and then just pull that across. Because long-term debt, we could do a debt schedule. Essentially, oh, wow, my back is like fucked, bro. That was crazy. Okay. Yeah, we could basically do a debt schedule, looking at like when different parts of your debt mature. But we're not gonna do that. We're just gonna straight line it for these purposes. All right. And then other non-current liabilities. So I'm gonna grow that line with revenue. I'm sure you're sensing a trend here. And just go ahead and do that. And then pull that across. And then total liabilities, you're just using a sum function to take this entire section. Cool. And then pull that across. Very nice, very nice. All right. Everyone good on liabilities? We're all good, we're all good? All right. So now when it comes to common stock, for the most part, you can project this using stock-based compensation of like the projections that we have for stock-based compensation, because as I mentioned, for your statements to balance, it's already taking away from like revenues and cash, etc., because it is an expense to the company. Like the company takes it in as an expense. Over here, I told you like it's kind of like hidden either in like R&D or SG&A. And that's going to impact your statement from balancing at the end. So it's really important that you actually add back stock-based compensation because it does issue more common stock. So that's like the other line item that kind of corresponds with that expense. Does that make sense? Because like for every debit, there's a credit, that kind of idea. Okay, so what we're going to do is take previous year and then add stock-based compensation, which we have up here. And then enter that. And then drag that over to the right. Ghost trying to get in. All right, so dragging that over to the right. Make sure to audit your cells, clicking F2 to make sure they're referencing the right things. They should be. And then we'll be good. And then we're almost done for today with this statement. We can go over the cash flow statement really fast. Okay, so other comprehensive income, like I mentioned earlier, if you're not able to attribute a certain other item, because other items are really buckets for a lot of different things, if you're not able to attribute it to something that's operational, then just straight line it. If not, do revenue, if you're able to attribute it to something specific, like let's say like you're looking at like other expense and you go look at like what that is in the 10K and it's like taxes payable, whatever, you can grow in like tax rate as opposed to revenue. That's kind of the idea there. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna straight line it, so referencing the very last thing, and then pulling that all the way to the right. And then total equity equals sum. Enter that, and then pull that over to the right. All right. So our book's not balanced, but that's okay because we still have a few line items that are missing that we haven't added yet because they're dependent on other schedules, etc., etc. But with that, we can go over to the cash flow statement, which I didn't empty. Is you guys just filled too? Haha. Okay. Well, delete it. Just delete this section. Like just the values, like clicking the delete button on your computer. This will not take too long. Okay. So, for this one, you're going to take net income, which we already computed, right? Which is the importance of a 3-statement model. You can easily reference everything in one sheet. So again, you want to make sure your model is all in one sheet as opposed to like one model for income statement, one model for balance sheet. Like you want to make it all kind of like a longer model. So you can go ahead and look for net income. And something that I want you guys to kind of note here is the way that this sheet is structured. It has something called buckets. That's also a common or these kind of like X's. It's also like a common thing when it comes to good formatting of like a good model. So I can use these exits and like remember how I told you that like you can use control and the arrow key to move in any direction, right? But if I use control and there's no text on the other side of this, right? Like for example here, let's say I'm trying to move like all the way down here. If I go from here to here, I have to go one by one by one by one still to some degree, right? And if I go over here, there's like no text. Like it just like teleports me to the bottom and now I'm just like, whoa, what happened? Like all that stuff, right? So you want to kind of assign little X's in these small miniature little columns in order to work as elevators. They're pretty much called elevators into different sections of your model. So now if I control and I click down, now I'm in the income statement. I click down, now I'm in the balance sheet. I click down, now I'm in the cash flow statement by navigating to these. And I can move around my doc really quickly, right? So that's kind of, try using that whenever you're getting to net income. So right now we're down here in the cash flow statement. So equals, I want the net income from this year. I'm going to navigate over here and then use my elevators to go over to the income statement and then move over here to net income. Enter that in. And that's it. Then you just drag that across and then it'll pull the net income from that section. Same for stock-based compensation. Here, I'm gonna skip stock-based compensation because you guys can do that on your own. Over here, when you're looking at decreases and increases in working capital assets, that's gonna be a little bit different than what we've done. So it's gonna look a little bit like this, where you're summing a section and then subtracting another section. So basically, we're gonna start with equals 1 times. We're in the decreases and increases in working capital section. So I'm going to put an X on stock-based comp. So we have equals 1 times sum. So typing sum. And then open parentheses. And now we're going to go to the previous year non-cash current assets. So navigating up here in our doc, I told you this earlier, our current assets are everything above property, plant, and equipment, right? So like these things. don't click any, you don't have to click anything, but just kind of looking, right? These are all of our current assets because property, plant, and equipment is like a long-term asset, and then so is other non-current assets, right? So non-cash, so not accounting for cash and cash equivalents. So looking at these specifically, we're gonna sum the previous year of those things. Does that make sense? Okay. So previous year, non-current, right? Or previous year current, but non-cash, right? So it looks like that. And then I'm going to subtract sum of current year non-cash. So same thing, but of this year. End parentheses. And then enter that. All right. Any questions on that one? You can go ahead and drag it over if not. Okay. Great. So increases and decreases in working capital liabilities. So this one's going to be a little different. So we're going to use, actually, are you guys good to move on to the next one? Yeah, okay. We're going to use sum and then looking at this year's current liabilities. So looking at these over here, all of these are current liabilities. Accounts payable, other current liabilities, deferred revenue, commercial paper, because they're separated in two sections, right? So looking first at our current year, selecting those, including commercial paper, by the way, even though it doesn't have anything in it, make sure it's selected. So when we add something, it'll auto-populate. Some of that, and parentheses, minus the sum of previous year's current liabilities. And parentheses. Does that make sense? All right. Drag that across. All right. So for other non-current liabilities, we're going to do equals this year's other non-current liabilities, which is a line item, by the way, it's this one. Literally says other non-current liabilities, right? We're gonna do this year's minus the previous year's other non-current liabilities, right? And then we're going to just drag that across. Okay. And then if you sum all of these, minus x, I guess, equals, right, and drag that across, that is your cash from operating activities. And you've completed that section of the cash flow statement. For this, you're literally going to input capital expenditures, which we haven't calculated, otherwise you would reference it. For this, you would just input long-term debt. You would input these exactly. There's not like a formula for it. And then you would sum it as well. And then for this, you sum each statement. So each cash flow statement. So it'd be like equals this one plus this one plus this one. So operating plus investing plus financing gives us our net change in cash during the period, right? All right. So I'm gonna leave this bit at that. Any questions on any of that so far? Okay. That's pretty much the good bulk of the three-statement model. So as you can see, it's a lot easier, hopefully, than you guys thought. Do you guys feel like it was easier, harder than you anticipated, or just about what you anticipated? Yeah.
Yeah, because people like talk about it like, well, like, no, I don't think it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people don't even know how to do it,
Yeah,
but
talk,
it's okay too.
and then like, I don't know. But yeah, you made it seem like easier than like what I was anticipating at least.
Yeah. And that's like the bulk of the modeling. We'll do DCF some this weekend if you guys pull up, and then we'll do some more next week. Again, I don't think the DCF is like you can do your entire deck without yet building out your DCF and be fine. And whatever other like forecasting like models as well, right? So in terms of that, don't worry about the modeling. If you communicate with me earlier, I can try to help you out more than not, you know? But something to keep in mind there. My big thing is like, you guys have written essays, you guys have done PowerPoint presentations, you guys have read articles before. Everything else outside of this, you've literally already done in your life, and you probably feel like a pretty good grasp on. Like your ability to make like a slide deck, like you probably feel pretty decent about that, I'm sure. This is probably the most intimidating part of it. And if you were to walk in this room right now and look at this, you'd be like, holy hell, what the fuck are they doing? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this looks kind of like big, right? But it's not that much and it's not that scary. And I feel like after starting it, it feels hopefully a little bit easier for you guys and a little bit like less anxiety inducing. I hope. Okay, perfect. All right. So some other things I've been doing. I put together, so actually two things. Stock screener. I sent this already in the channel for stock pitches. Highly recommend you go over here to analyst recommendation, where it says analyst recommendation. Click buy or better. It's literally hacks to find stocks that are a buy. And then filter this by PE ratio. I can switch this, and I want it to be the lower ones. And then look at these and see what they are and what they're doing and why, and like research into like why they're buys. And you're pretty much starting ahead because you know it's already recommended by analysts. And now you can just see if it's something you want to do and if it has strong enough drivers for you to feel like it's a good pitch. And you know that some of its financials tend to be favorable because its price to equity ratio is favorable, which means that it's probably potentially undervalued. So that's a quick hack to finding some nice things to research. I've also been putting together, I did some research into some equities, Nebius, and then I had Deere. These are up for grabs from you guys. It's like a lot of information. Deere especially, I think, is fire. Like there's different levels of density. This is an ags. The way that I went about finding this stock, just to kind of like talk you guys through it for like 2 seconds, I didn't use a screener. This is like purely like a rationale pick. I was looking at an article. It said that we're looking at potentially lifting sanctions on Russia, primarily when it comes to their agriculture, because that's viewed as kind of like almost like war crime level, right? We're not allowed to impact their agriculture because that can impact global hunger. And so, as we lift restrictions on certain banks that impact their agricultural sector, that's going to lead to what? Them producing more agriculture, right? And then exporting more agriculture, right? And so I'm like, okay, what companies are going to benefit from more Russian agriculture? So the first thing I did, I looked up, okay, what agriculture companies have previously been producers or been suppliers for Russia? Deere had a huge contract with them back in 2018. And then as I research more into them, I can see, okay, they're also having significant like technical innovation in terms of building out different sorts of automation. So previously, their revenue, the way that it would function is that you would buy a tractor one time and now that's a one-time purchase. And then whenever rates are really high and everything's really expensive, because you typically borrow money to buy something that's as expensive as a tractor, right? It's kind of like buying a car. People would stop buying, or farmers would stop buying. So what they've done instead is they've actually created some sort of automated processes, like things that will screen how much it takes to actually water the crop so it can maximize efficiency. And they made those subscription based. So now their revenue is actually recurring and more stable regardless of economic conditions. Right? I literally did that last night in probably like an hour. Like, my point with it being, like, the more you overcomplicate it in your head, because like we're all prone to doing that, the scarier it feels and the more overwhelming it feels. But literally, like, just think through something, be like, okay, I feel like this leads to this, what would happen? And literally use ChatGPT, bro. Like, it's a perfect resource. It's hacks, ask it a billion questions, And yeah, and then I looked at their financials, and their financials are really strong, and I'm able to give you guys some potentially good stock picks from you guys to pick from. So you guys are well positioned as well, because I do want you guys to succeed in this. And also, like, I hope that you guys also, I mean, I know that you do, but like, this is our first semester running this program, and you guys have like probably like triple, quadruple the resources than the majority of RIF members, and a lot goes into that. And this is kind of our way of saying, like, hey, like, this program is successful and it is worth it and it does yield results. And it's also our like way of kind of like feeding back into RIF in terms of contribution, because the internal pitch is kind of like the center of RIF, and ultimately, like, we are all the same resource hub. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the fun experiences that you guys have been able to have, that comes from me selling you guys to a degree. So, like, help me sell you. You know what I'm saying? I think all of you guys are super capable. And in terms of time allocation, I get it. Like, it's not the most ideal, but I do think like crazier things have been done, and like you guys signed up for something that is supplemental to work a little harder and like put a little more effort in towards something. I get that there's like things that are harder, and like there's not always an ability to like do everything you want to do. But like, communicate with me. I'd rather you work with me than like put it off to the last minute and then kind of like have a little bit of like a crash out and feel like you're not capable of doing it or like whatever else. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, ultimately, there's a lot of resources. I'm gonna keep doing research into different equities. Um, but yeah, we'll keep working at it next week, and then I'll send out info for Saturday. Also, on your calendars, we have Women in Finance panel scheduled for April 14th. And that's on the Winna calendar to reference as well. I think it'll be like 5:30. We're still building that out. It's still like kind of like boots on the ground, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. First, can we start the financial model if we know what our stock is? Could we tell you to get the modeling assumptions? Because can't you not
Yes.
start? Can you get those?
Yeah, I'll probably do it all at one go. So like once most people have given me theirs, because they have to like go and like get it from like full terminal. Like it's like a physical thing.
Okay.
So it'll be like a bulk thing, like a bulk order, that kind of thing. But yeah, we can definitely start looking into that. But I would say, oh, also a big thing, don't necessarily have to start building out your slides. You can. If you want to start with like a Google Doc of like information, you can do that first. The whole thing is going to be circled on your drivers. Pick 3 or 4 drivers and then just yap about those and drill into those. Like that's going to be the most helpful thing you can do. I honestly think starting on a doc is easier, at least for me. And I can also like look through and work through it with you. But yeah, I really want you guys to succeed. So, yeah. And what was your second question?
It was for the pictures we took at the CFA thing. You know that woman who came up and took a picture of all of us at that table?
Kind of, maybe.
She said she was gonna send the pictures to Katie,
Yeah.
then Katie's gonna send to you, and I was just wondering if you had them yet, because I was gonna post it on LinkedIn.
I haven't received them. That's a great question. I haven't received them, but I'll have to reach out to Katie. She's out of office right now for like a little bit of a while. So whenever she's back, and she's on vacation with her kids right now.
Got it. Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you.
Okay. Anything else? All right, swag. And then next weekend we can practice pitches, so you guys won't be like going up there for the first time on your own. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
No, there's no panel for Thursday. That's the one that's going to be on the 14th.